Awesome. Thank you, Katie. So my name is Dominic Paolino. I'm part of Accenture. I am part of our tokenization of identity, money, and objects practice. And I am really pleased to be joined here today with Chris Buchanan, who is the capability areas lead for digital identity at MITRE. We have a lot to talk about today. I just will start by saying, I'm really excited that digital identity is among the topics being discussed here today. We've heard it mentioned through miscellaneous comments and speeches throughout the day this morning. And as many of us know, with few exceptions in today's world, there is no financial transaction that does not include an identity component. And so I think it's great that we have this conversation here kicking off the Fintech Hub chats today. So why don't we jump right in? Chris, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about MITRE, and we'll get into some topics.
Okay, thank you, Dominic. So MITRE, in particular, is a company that administers federally funded research and development centers for the U.S. government. And that's an interesting job to have because MITRE itself is a nonprofit and the FFRDCs actually belong to the government. And what we do is we fill a space that really buys down risk for the government in their interactions with industry and academia. And we do a lot of connecting, which is why when offered the opportunity to talk at a digital currency conference, we decided to talk about digital identity instead because it's a connective tissue. So thank you.
Why don't we start with the basics? How do you define digital identity?
So I have a very broad definition of digital identity that is an identifier and an attribute. That's it, right? And so an identifier and an attribute that refers to an entity. Let's augment that. So it's a very broad definition, and you can think of it in terms of we all have sort of multiple identities, and if you want to know what they are, ask people to list your attributes, right? And if you ask one person, ask another person, ask another, you'll find that you actually have different attributes depending on who you're talking to, and that kind of goes back to how we think of identity in the decentralized identity community as sort of this directed graph of subject, attribute, and so on.
Awesome, thank you. So folks in the Web3 tokenization space are familiar with how they can self-custody assets. They have a wallet. People are familiar with this kind of user sovereignty topic and the custodial model. So how do you think about user sovereignty and the custodial wallet in the context of digital identity?
Yeah, this is a really interesting space. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk here today was because the digital identity community has been kind of struggling with these same topics that you have on your signs here today, privacy, inclusion, and so forth, mainly because we work off the same hardware, but also because identity is inherent in most things that we do online. Now, when we talk about the sovereignty versus custodianship, there's a long history kind of going back and forth between this idea that we want to have our wallet in our pocket and have physical control, or that we want to have a cloud that backs up our stuff and makes everything safe and makes interactions easier. The argument is often I can't recover my stuff if I lose my wallet. There's all kinds of arguments for and against either one. And at the end of the day, from the digital identity perspective, I think that the underlying technology should be somewhat agnostic of that. But what I will say for sure is that you can't have inclusion without custodianship. Because as you move into populations that don't have smartphones, you're confronted with the need for custodial wallets immediately.
So on that inclusivity access element, right, that's going to be a huge issue. I mean, there's a significant multi-billion person population that does not have, wealth or the ability to purchase a smartphone. What are some models that you've seen and the way you can create a low-cost custodial model for a digital identity construct?
Yeah, so this is a really, it goes back to your definition of a wallet. And this is, again, something the identity community has struggled with because if you look at a crypto wallet for currency, it's fairly simple. in the identity space, a wallet is more of an agent. It's got some smarts to it. It's able to do some evaluations, to check hashes and signatures, and also kind of conform to the user's desires, if that makes sense. If you think about Apple Pay, for example, when you have a default card that comes up, but then you could select a different one, those kinds of things are critical to that design. Now, when you get into custodianship, right, there's a couple of arguments for it. One is inclusivity, another is market lock. If all of your stuff ends up in your Apple wallet or your Google wallet, and that's where everything's locked down, then you have a big tech intermediary sort of in all of your stuff. That can be problematic. Maybe the right way to go, maybe the wrong way to go. Everybody has an opinion on that. But when we go to custodial in particular, it frees us up it gives us platform independence, but also you run into the problem of how do I ensure in a non-repetitive way that the person making the transaction is the owner of the asset, right? So we've looked at that at MITRE in terms of digital identity from the perspective of medical records. Matter of fact, we did after the war in Ukraine started, we did a quick project where we built a paper ID that was biometrically authenticatable, so it was non-fungible, couldn't be transferred, and if you lost it, it was no big deal. And it was really cheap to produce. You could just print it out on a regular inkjet printer or send it as a PDF and people could show it with their phone if they had a phone. And the reason that's important is because what we were really doing was creating a biometrically enabled authenticator to the custodial wallet, right? And if you're going to talk about inclusion at the edge where people don't have phones, you have to get back in some ways to a physical credential. And the cheapest way to do that is paper, right? And if you can make something that's unforgeable, non-transferable on paper, which is completely possible, then you can take that forward to be able to do things like biometric authentication at the edge to prove control over the wallet that then allows you to that non-repudiation of that asset transfer.
So at the risk of getting too technical here, I do think probably many folks are thinking like, okay, you printed it out on an inkjet printer, that can't be that secure. Like, yeah, it's a printer. So how do folks print something like this out at the technical layer? How do you ensure that it is authentic and provable and trusted and all those?
Yeah, so trust is probably the biggest word there is, right, as far as both the digital currency space and the identity space. And when we talk about trust in particular, it really comes down to making it mirror kind of human interactions in a way. If Dominic introduces me to someone who trusts Dominic and says, hey, Chris is a good guy, then that other person is immediately going to have a higher opinion of me because of their opinion of Dominic, right? And so what we get back to is I would consider Dominic the issuer of that credential. Good guy is the attribute, right? And so because Dominic issued it, because Dominic's in the trust network, then now that end user can trust me, and if I do something bad, guess who they don't trust anymore? Dominic, right? And so the model in the digital identity space that has been developed under the Trust Over IP Foundation, and just a disclaimer here, MITRE's a steering committee member on that, has really been focused around how to do that digital trust relationship. So when we get into a paper credential, it's digital signatures. You're basically just putting a QR code or some other digitized blob of data that's digitally signed, and then you're building the trust network around the cryptography. At the verifier side, you build the trust network around the application and access to the application that allows you to read that QR code. And you can actually layer that, right, so that you have different abilities to unwrap that thing so that maybe I can see part of it or not all of it. If we get into zero trust, not zero trust, I'm sorry. If we get into zero knowledge proofs, we immediately get into the I need compute on my side space, right? So we avoided that by saying, okay, the wallet's going to be custodial, the wallet can do the zero knowledge proof, and all this card is, it's not the wallet, it's just my token to access the wallet. It's my proof that I own the asset to the wallet, and then the wallet can do the zero knowledge proofs, the wallet can do all of those nice secure features, and including privacy enhancing, minimal distribution type things.
Awesome. So thinking again about the complexity and how these things are going to advance, right? We use our identity, we use our credit cards in all different kinds of contexts. One of them is, I give someone else permission to use my credit card to make a purchase for the business or whatever. How do you think about delegation and guardianship, and how does that play into digital identity and how it transports?
Yeah, so we ran into this in the digital identity space almost immediately after COVID, because we started down, like digital currency, we're kind of looking for the killer app for decentralized ID. It's a two-sided market, very similar sort of situation. And COVID provided potentially an opportunity for international travel. So we created an organization under ID 2020 to address international travel with COVID credentials. And in that, we learned a whole lot. But one of the things that came out of that paper was guardianship, because you don't just travel alone. If you bring your children, then you have to be able to speak for them in some way, right? And it's not just children. It's adults who, for whatever reason, might be under custody, or it could be a court that needs to make an adjudication to take something over. And in all of those cases, what you're really talking about is guardianship from the identity perspective. And so generally, there are several ways that can work. And I would encourage people to sort of go and read the paper generally. But the way that we solved it in the Ukraine perspective was to actually sort of chain that identity. So you had parent of as one of those attributes, and that was clearly linked to the cryptography that was in the child's identity, right? So it's a simple way forward.
Cool. So you mentioned earlier blockchain, and a lot of folks probably think that digital identity relies on blockchain or some kind of verifiable credentials. But earlier, just before we got on stage, you were telling me about kind of a breakthrough of sorts around key event receipt infrastructure. And so, just in the spirit of people are here to learn and understand new concepts, and this is relatively breaking. Can you tell us a little bit about this key receipt infrastructure and how it works?
So how it works is probably beyond our time level generally, but the key event receipt infrastructure, KERI, is well, let me back up a little bit. We said identity and blockchain too many times, and we got congressional attention, and we very quickly realized that it was impossible to communicate private identity and blockchain in the same sentence. So we started looking for other things to say, and we started with decentralized, or we started with the ledgers, and then we went to a couple of other things, and we kept trying to sort of mask the back end because we weren't really putting identity on the blockchain anyway. It was more just the trust anchor, right? But nobody could get past that privacy marker of I'm going to have my identity on a blockchain that everybody can see. That was where things got out of control. And recently, in the last, I would say 18 months, I don't remember exactly when it started, one of the cryptographers associated with decentralized digital ID, Sam Smith, put out a paper called Key Event Receipt Infrastructure. And what this does is it creates a trust anchor, like a certificate authority, that allows you to rotate keys without any risk overhead. You don't need a centralized certificate authority anymore, and allows you to carry that forward. And it also has an adjudication authority in the network that allows you to detect duplicity across a network. So if I say I'm Chris here and I say I'm Bob there, that's immediately sort of flagged. And I'm not sure at this point. I don't know enough about CBDC to know for sure that this is directly applicable. But what I will say is that it is directly applicable to maintaining trust. And it is far faster than the blockchain stuff that's available today. As a matter of fact, in digital identity, I always say there's more logins per day than there are dollars, period, right? The scales and speeds that we deal with, the transactions per second that we deal with in digital identity, especially with the introduction of zero trust, are astronomical compared to the transactions of swiping cards. And so this was a very attractive technology to us, and what you saw is a lot of development sort of petered out in waiting for this IEEE standard for carry to come around. And I think if you look up the IEEE standard, the place to start is a technology called ACDC, which is authenticated.
Great band.
Yeah, right. It's a rock band. Don't just Google ACDC, but IEEE, it's authenticated chain data containers, right? And the reason it's at containers at the end instead of objects is because ACDC is more fun to say than ACDO. But really what you get is a stream of data snippets that can all have non-repudiation back to the same trusted entity. So you get this whole ecosystem of trust without the blockchain.
That's awesome. I'm definitely going to look into that a little bit. And I think, whether it's duplicity in double spend or in identity, I think it's relevant. So it's worth considering, I think, in the CBDC space, at least to research further. Well, we're just about out of time here. I just want to give you the floor, maybe if you have another comment or two to kind of wrap everything together and help the audience understand, how they should be thinking about digital identity in the context of digital currencies and CBDC.
Sure, thank you. So I want to just communicate something that was communicated to me at a conference. A young lady said this, and as an engineer, I immediately understood the value of it. And that is that the most inclusive technologies are the most scalable technologies. And that's what actually led me to do the research into paper-based authenticators and some of this other stuff. And as we're looking across the market that needs to be served the most, right, then it starts to become, I think, worth thinking about more than maybe in some other economic aspects. Inclusion, not just for the sake of fairness, but also because it is the scalable, the most scalable solution out there. So, and fair, by the way.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's been really helpful.